as you consider the process that we just talked about on the last slide, the circular process of the procedures of what happens in special education and services in schools, once a student is diagnosed with a disability and is eligible for support in classrooms, I'd like you to keep the image on this slide in mind. And then I'm going to review as a general educator what your roles are. Don't worry about taking notes. I have those outlined on the next slide. So really at step 3 and 4 in that circular process that we just talked about, where a student is determined to have a disability and is now eligible for special education services, the disability becomes the barrier. Barrier is kind of a negative term, but you have to think about it structurally and procedurally. We have a student in your classroom, which is the environment, who now has a disability. And that's a barrier, no matter how we look at it. That's most of the time it's a barrier to learning, it's a barrier to access, it's a barrier to social opportunities. It creates a speed bump, if you will, to what happens in your classroom. As we move on to steps 4 and 5 and 6 in that procedure, special education works with general education to provide the access and the specially designed instruction that student needs so that barrier doesn't prevent access and prevent learning and opportunities in our schools. What are your roles and responsibilities as a general educator once the student is diagnosed and is considered eligible? This continues on through our next 3 weeks. You're going to see these 6 principles of IDEA many times over the next couple of weeks, but I wanted to give you a quick overview here so that we can build on those. Now that we've discussed eligibility and a student receives a diagnosis and is part of special education, your role as a general educator under IDEA, which is our federal expectations, your role follows the 6 principles of IDEA. And I've rewritten them on the next slide to be more focused on the general education piece, stepping away a little bit from the special education piece. General educators, 1, are expected to provide data and observations for the evaluation. So in steps 1, 2, and 3 of that circular process, you can provide that general education. If you're a 3rd grade teacher, you can provide the data on how that student functions on 3rd grade content, curriculum, and in your classroom. General educators can also provide connections to the family. Lots of times you are the closest to that family. You can help them participate, you can provide comfort, and you can even establish the fact that they have rights. You're not expected to be an expert in those rights, but you can remind them of the fact that we're into a kind of a new world here that has extra rights and protections for families and students, and refer them to the right people and to the right resources. General educators are critical members of the IEP team. Legally, number 1, you're required to be there, but as a special educator, we often consider and describe our general educator colleagues as the specialists in the content, the curriculum, the environment, the standards, and the skills. As a special educator, I have different training, and that is not my specialty area. If you were thinking about middle school or high school science, that's out of my bandwidth as a special educator, and that's where we come in. We ask you to come in to the IEP with the data and with your specialty area and ready to help provide access for that student with a disability. General educators can also, 4th principle, general educators can also advocate for the least restrictive environment, welcoming the student into their classroom, setting expectations that this is where that student belongs, and there's no reason with support that we can't accommodate and modify and have that student have access and a sense of belonging in those classrooms. General educators also support the implementation of the IEP. So after step 5 and 6, when that diagnosis, eligibility is complete and the IEP has been written, General educators implement those parts, especially the supplementary aids and services or accommodations, and many of you are probably seeing this day to day in your classrooms. Lastly, and principle number 6, you evaluate students' progress. That brings us back to the top cycle, in that you would evaluate a student with a disability just as you would all the other, the chance for evaluation is there just as it is for all your other students, but you bring that back to the team to help make decisions on IEPs, on accommodations and modifications. You're the specialty in your area and you know how that piece fits. So keep these things in mind. The visual on this page, that the disability becomes the speed bump or the barrier once it is established. And then on the next slide, the 6 principles of IDA written specifically for you as a general educator.